And I said you can stop if you want with a Z, and most people stop with a Z, but not me. In the places I go, there are things that I see that I never could spell if I stopped with the Z. Now, I'm telling you this because you're one of my friends. My alphabet starts where your alphabet ends. My alphabet starts with this letter called Yez. It's the letter I use to spell Yezamotez. You'll be sort of surprised what there is to be found once you go beyond Z and start poking around. So on beyond zebra, explore like Columbus, discover new letters like Wum, which is for Wumbus, my high-spouting whale who lives up on a hill and who never comes down till it's time to refill. So on beyond Z, it's high time you were shown that you really don't know all there is to be known. I invite you this morning to accompany me on a journey beyond zebra. I invite you to join me because today we are looking for Christmas. And Christmas cannot be found on this side of Z. 2,000 years ago, God added a new letter to our alphabet in the virgin conception. God had to add a new letter because no existing letter could spell Emmanuel, which means God with us. Therefore, if you want to find Christmas, then you'll have to journey beyond zebra. On beyond zebra. What do you suppose Dr. Seuss meant by those words? Well, I think he means that you and I have been given 26 letters in the alphabet with which to spell our words. And we also have certain mental categories that we have developed through the years into which we nicely fit the experiences of life. For instance, we all have a category in our mind for dogs. And when we see dogs, we're not surprised at all. We are not shocked at all because we fit them into the category of dogs. Sometimes, however, we find that we have a category with no real instances. For example, unicorns and Bigfoot and Tinkerbell, or flights into fantasy where we have these delightful images, but we have no experiences. But the most shocking thing is when we discover an instance, a real event or experience that just doesn't fit any previously known category. Well, that's on beyond zebra. The conception of Jesus was like that. It was an instance without a category. Oh, it started out as just the opposite. It was your classic boy meets girl. Joe Loves Mary had probably been carved by the young carpenter in a tree out back of his house. And then they were engaged. It was that delightful, magical time when a young couple can hardly wait, and at long last they were to be united in marriage. One man looked back upon the months of his engagement, and he said he suffered from all the symptoms of a man in love: a silly grin, bad grades, an overdrawn checking account. He'd drive to the store, and when he got there, for the life of himself, he couldn't remember why he had driven there to start with. Well, I must be in love. I do that all the time. That may be how Joseph felt about Mary. He may have been so moony-eyed that he kept hitting his thumb when the hammer slid off the nail in the carpenter shop. Such were his hopes, such were his dreams of the happiness that was to come. But then it happened. Mary turned up pregnant. And all of a sudden, Joseph's garden of love dissolved into a world of hurt. A veritable living hell. Mary tried to explain what happened, and Joseph yearned to believe her, but there was simply no way that even a heart full of love could dispel all of those nagging suspicions in his heart and in his mind, because Mary's explanation was simply beyond belief. W.H. Auden has written a poem capturing Joseph's self-taunting soul. Joseph, have you heard what Mary said occurred? Yes, it may be so. Is it likely? No. Mary may be pure, but Joseph, are you sure? How is one to tell? Suppose, for instance, maybe, then maybe not. But Joseph, you know what your world will say about you anyway. Wanting to believe Mary, but unable. Unwilling to marry her, and yet wanting to spare her as much pain as possible, Joseph concludes that a divorce has to take place, but as quietly as possible. We look into this story, and most of us, I think, would agree that Joseph's reaction was normal according to his range of experience. There was only one way a woman could get pregnant. And he knew that he was not the father. And so naturally, he felt hurt. He felt betrayed. And yet, as we look at verse 20 in Matthew 1, we discover that Joseph's real problem was none of those things at all. His real problem was fear. He was afraid to believe Mary. Joseph faced an age-old trait. We human beings are afraid of the unknown. Anytime we are confronted by the unknown, something previously unheard of or unseen, we instantaneously conclude that it's got to be bad or dangerous or horrible or false. And listen to this. Our fear of the unknown keeps us from exploring new possibilities and growing in our relationship with God. The cartographers, map makers of centuries ago were restricted in their ability to draw maps of the world, both by their crude instruments and by their limited knowledge. We are amazed that some of them actually did so well, but all of them had one common trait. When they came to the limits of their knowledge of the world, in the margins of the maps, they would write something like this: "Beyond this, there be dragons." Why didn't they write, "Beyond this is the unknown"? Why didn't they write, "Beyond this is something desirable and beautiful"? See, they always assumed that what was beyond what they knew was a place of danger. Now, not just possible death by natural causes, but a grisly death in the jaws of flesh-eating dragons. Well, like cartographers of old, there are many people who come to the Bible and they come to the virgin conception with the same kind of attitude. They populate the unknown with dragons rather than admit to a mystery that is beyond their knowing. They say, "Oh, it's nothing more than suspicion. It's foolishness. It's hogwash. It's a fairy tale made up by people who had such a primitive knowledge of the world that they had no idea of natural law." Well, when someone says that, it might be a good idea to suggest that they become acquainted with Joseph. Joseph knew only too well the natural processes of conception. And that is precisely why he resolved to divorce Mary. And yet, if Joseph came to believe in the virgin conception, then anyone can believe. Joseph was anything but naive. But perhaps the most naive people are those today who believe that they can still live comfortably inside their Newtonian world governed by the law of nature. I dare not pose as an expert in an area in which I am not an expert. And yet, if you do any reading in modern science, you know that the scientific system we've lived with for so many years is melting before our very eyes. The Big Bang hypothesis, Einstein's theory of relativity, other developments in theoretical physics, the entropic principle of the cosmos, even evolution is under attack like never before, not merely by creationists, but by more and more non-Christian people within the scientific community. Parthenogenesis, birth without a father, is now known to exist in some realms of nature. Indeed, we're finding that miracles no longer pose the intellectual stumbling block that they once have posed. We're finding that this world is just too wild and too crazy and too messy and too wonderful a place to be shoehorned into a straitjacket of natural law. And many scientists are the first to say today that there are categories beyond anything that we have ever dreamed before, and that our self-confident secular world is crumbling. Many card-carrying members of the scientific community have less and less resistance to believing in miracles, even without eyes of faith. The virgin conception is easier to accept today than ever before, but so what? What does it mean? I mean, if Jesus was born in that way, and I believe that he was, what does it prove? Well, by itself, it proves nothing. You see, a person can believe in the virgin conception from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet and still not be a Christian. See, Christmas is found not merely by going beyond zebra, not merely by believing in the virgin conception. Christmas is found in going so far beyond zebra that we accept this message that the angel gave to Joseph. Not only was this baby miraculously conceived, but the baby growing inside of Mary was none other than God in human flesh. See, that is the miracle of miracles. Look once again at verses 22 and 23. Now all this took place to fulfill what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet. Behold, the virgin shall be with child and shall bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which translated means God with us. See, that's the so what right there. God with us. The incarnation of God in human flesh. Who is this baby? The Apostle Paul answers that question in Colossians chapter 1. Notice what he says. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things have been created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. For it was the Father's good pleasure for all the fullness to dwell in him, and through him to reconcile all things to himself. This baby is the one who in the beginning sent flaming stars and suns spinning off into the limitless reaches of a universe so vast that our own solar system is no bigger than a BB in a boxcar. And you and I can no more grasp the totality of this baby with our finite minds than we can take the Milky Way and capture it in a thimble or put time in a bottle. Mary, said the angel, would give birth to an infinite infant. And sure enough, 9 months later, a tiny stable contained something larger than this whole vast world. God in the flesh. That is the miracle of miracles. And that is light years beyond zebra. That's also farther than most people are willing to go when it comes to Jesus. They attempt to pigeonhole him into a category they already know. We hear it all the time. They try to pay him a compliment by making him the very best in that category. They say that Jesus was the greatest teacher the world has ever known, that Jesus was the greatest moral example that the world has ever known. See, those are all categories that they know. They are categories that are familiar, and they stick him in those categories, but at no point do they allow him to escape the human category and become a class all by himself, the unique God-man. See, we have no category for that. We've never seen one of those before, which is exactly how many people reacted when they met Christ 21 centuries ago. They ransacked the dictionary for words to describe him. But to meet Jesus is like burning your hands on a star. Everywhere he went, he moved in an atmosphere of amazement and wonder. We're told that they were astonished at his doctrine. They feared exceedingly, and they said to one another, "What kind of man is this?" Even the disciples were utterly astounded. And finally, the chief priests and the scribes and the Roman authorities couldn't take him anymore, so they nailed him to a cross. You and I, of course, are not Roman soldiers nailing Jesus to a cross. No, we're innkeepers who have no room for him. When Jesus makes us uncomfortable, we just put out the no vacancy sign. For this strange, unique baby who grew into a man who does not fit our preconceived notions of reality, there was and there often is no room in this world. Yet Joseph knew that if he did not accept this baby, he would lose the love of a good woman. And what's more, he would miss Christmas. And so it is with us if we do not accept this baby. Because Christmas is beyond zebra. The Bible tells us that no new being came into existence through this virgin conception within Mary, but that the eternal being, the second person of the Trinity, came down into the human race and was born. Paul wrote to the church at Galatia, when the fullness of time came, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, in his memorable way. C.S. Lewis said that Jesus was conceived when God took off the glove of nature and touched Mary with his finger. Thus, Jesus did not evolve up and out of history, but he descended down and into history. Using another image, Lewis said, one may think of a diver first reducing himself to nakedness and then glancing in midair and then gone with a splash, rushing down through green and warm water into black and cold water, down through the increasing pressure into the death-like region of ooze and slime and old decay, and then back up again, back to color, back to light, his lungs almost bursting until he suddenly breaks through the surface, holding in his hand that dripping, precious thing he went down to recover. That dripping, precious thing is you and me. And this is the season of the year that we celebrate his coming down to us. Yet even Lewis's magnificent metaphor breaks down. Because when God took the plunge, he didn't just get wet, but he became a fish, so to speak. God became a human, born out of a womb, just as you and I were born, and raised in a human family, just as you and I were raised. And perhaps this is part of the incarnation with which we have the most trouble. Not the deity of Christ, but his humanity. There are those who imagine the incarnation of Christ to be something like Clark Kent in a phone booth. I know some of you have never heard of a phone booth. For most folks today, the phone booth is your back pocket. But when I was growing up, phone booths were everywhere. These wonderful, magnificent boxes that you could go into, shut the door behind you. Clark Kent loved phone booths. He dressed like a normal man, but then he would jump into a phone booth and emerge as Superman. But see, Jesus wasn't Superman. He did not clothe himself in humanity in order to hide his deity. Jesus was fully human. See, the bullets didn't bounce off of his chest. He got stickers in his toes. He blackened his finger in the carpenter shop. Perhaps he struggled with math in school. Most likely he was good at some things, not so good at others. He had real hurts. He cried real tears. Why? Here's why. Only a real man could save us as we need to be saved. Only a real man could know us well enough to rule us. Only a real man could know us intimately and thoroughly, so that he is in fact our high priest. Harry Reasoner, in one of his radio commentaries, said that the idea of the Lord of the universe appearing in the form of a helpless babe is startling. And of course it is. Why? Simple. It defies logic. It is beyond logic. In fact, the whole concept is so revolutionary that it had to come from a God who is beyond the bounds of A to Z. May I say to you that this most illogical of notions is either all false or it is the truest thing in the world. It is the story of the great innocence of God the baby. And it has caused such a dramatic shock to the heart that if it is not true, then for Christians, nothing is true. I, for one, believe that it's all true. Emmanuel, God with us. Do you understand just how much God wants to share his life with you? So much so that he comes to you on his hands and knees as a baby. Now, I know it's incomprehensible. Yet Jesus is magnificently available to anyone who will step beyond zebra. This morning, I'm asking you to accept a new letter for your alphabet. For without the virgin conception, you cannot spell Emmanuel. And without Emmanuel, you cannot have Christmas. And if you don't have Christmas in your heart, there is no way you're going to find it under any tree. have you found Christmas? Have you accepted this incalculable movement of God in coming down into our world and taking on flesh? If you are willing to do that, you are going to know Christmas like you have never known Christmas before. And I believe that Christmas will take on for you an awe, a mystery, a freshness that perhaps has been lost long ago. He became one of us, to know us, to understand us, to love us, to lead us. I know there is not a category for that. And there never will be a category for that in human languages. We have to go beyond it. To Z. You'll be sort of surprised what there is to be found once you go beyond Z and start poking around. So on beyond Z, it's high time you were shown. You really don't know all there is to be known. If you have never reached out and touched your hand on that burning star, would you come today? Would you come today and accept Jesus Christ, Christmas, into your life? Really changes everything. We'd love to introduce you to Him. And during our time of invitation, you may want to take advantage of those moments to come forward and take my hand and simply say, I'm ready to get burned on a star. You looking for a church home? I've fallen in love with this ministry here, with this family of men and women who love the Lord and who have demonstrated again and again they're willing to go beyond Z. Maybe God's calling you to join with us here. You too can come forward during our time of invitation and take my hand and just say, Connell, I believe God wants me to be a part of this fellowship. We'll take it from there. Maybe you just want to kneel in this altar and pray and say, Lord, I've believed all the skeptics, but today I acknowledge that this world is too big, too vast, too wonderful, too messy, too crazy to discount you. And I'm going to begin living my life in light of your movement in this world and in my heart today. Let's pray together. Father, this is a special moment for us because we acknowledge and rehearse one of the two most fantastic events that you have wrought in this earth. The birth of your Son, Jesus Christ. And today we come to grips and to terms with the reality that is far beyond our knowing and yet is so very close to us and is being affirmed in our hearts even in this moment. What a magnificent Christmas this will be if only we come to the manger and receive what you have done and are doing into our lives, and that every day you're working. We need that. We want that. May we surrender to it in these moments.